Here we go. Well, my name's Paul Linfoot. The people ask me, well, how did I get involved with these cars and what have you. I think it was just from a young age watching them racing in touring cars on a Sunday like we all did, and I just fell in love with the car. And luckily my job, which was a panel beater and painter originally, turned into people asking me to do a little bit of restoration on Fords, any type of Fords. And then it just suddenly progressed that all it ended up being was RS500s. So it just grew naturally, really. There was no sort of intentions or anything, it just happened, really. Well, I've actually owned mid-50s, about 56 of my own personal cars that I've had sold and moved on. How many have I had through my workshops? I honestly couldn't remember. It will be hundreds. You know, at any one time we usually have anywhere between sort of 2 and 6 or 7 road cars. That wasn't me. So 6 or 7 road cars, and usually 2 to 3. I think most of 4 is of the genuine original RS500 touring cars that we also work on. The Sierra Cosworth started as the original 3-door Cosworth. Ford knew the potential of that car was massive. You know, it was doing really, really well as its original format as a 3-door. But they quickly realised that with a few alterations they could almost double the horsepower of that car. So they obviously then looked into what do we need to do to make this car faster, and obviously they developed what we now know as the RS500. And the reason it became the RS500 is there's a rule in motor racing at the time, it's called homologation. And the minimum amount of road-going versions of a car you have to produce is 500. So basically the RS500 road car was only built 500 cars because that was all they needed to build to complete the homologation process. So once they'd developed the RS500, as it were, they'd taken a standard Sierra Cosworth, they'd added the larger turbocharger, the intercool, everything they wanted to do, realised its potential was 500-600 horsepower. That'll do, we're happy with that, and then they built a 500 road car. Now that's a good question, because there's a lot of myths out there about all the suspension and everything being completely different. Basically the car underbody is exactly the same as the standard original Sierra Cosworth. Externally the only difference is what we call the aero pack. So the aerodynamics, which is the lip on the rear spoiler, which is called the gurney flap. They added the additional second lower rear spoiler. Then the front bumper, they added the lower front splitter and the cutout in the front bumper to let more air through into the radiator. But what people also don't realise until you tell them and they actually go and have a look, is that the 2 slots under the number plate on an RS500 bumper are 6 inches wider. But people don't recognise that. So externally that was it, and obviously the pinstripe mechanically is where things changed under the bonnet. Now that's where the big differences are. Obviously the engine was completely revised, so it had still a 205 engine block, but it was strengthened, so it was a thicker wall block with small core plugs. The cylinder head was sort of the same realistically. What they had to do for the homologation purposes was dowel the inlet on the cylinder head so that they could then allow the race cars to be dowelled to line up the inlet manifold perfectly. They had to port the cylinder head to 28mm, but internally it was exactly the same camshafts, the crank, conrods, everything was the same. And then the turbocharger, that is the big thing everybody notices. You lift the bonnet and straight away you this huge T4 turbocharger. The 8 injectors, which on the road car only 4 were connected. You could connect the other 4, but it meant changing the ECU and reprogramming it. But the bigger intercooler, the bigger airbox. So basically when you bought the RS500 road car, everything under the bonnet was exactly the same as what it was in the touring cars. And that is what made the RS500 the car everybody wanted, because to unleash 500 brake horsepower was so simple, because everything you needed to get that horsepower came with that car as standard. So it was just a few internal changes, remap the ECU, 550 horsepower. We talk about horsepower today, and a transit van comes with 160, 170 horsepower. So you talk about the Sierra Cosworth having just over 200, nobody really seems to bat an eyelid anymore. But when remember 37 years ago, when the Sierra Cosworth came out, it was what we always called, it was the Lamborghini for the council estate guy wanted. It was unbelievably fast. The RS500 only had 8 to 10 horsepower more, but it had a huge amount of turbo lag because of the huge T4. So initially people didn't like it because the power didn't come in till like 4,500 revs, but then it took off like a scalded rat, and obviously would keep pulling and keep pulling, whereas the standard Sierra sort of died off at 5,000-6,000 revs. So yes, it was quite a quick car in its day. It was quicker than most of its competitors from BMW, Vauxhall, whatever. It was quicker, but by today's standards now it's nothing. I mean, I remember there's a famous video on YouTube, I believe, of the police trying to catch a Lotus Cortina. They couldn't catch it.
We're not buying. Stop fire.
I think anything Ford has become naturally collectible, and that's because of what we call the blue collar workers. So everybody's dad, granddad had a Ford Sierra or a Ford Escort or whatever it may be. But then obviously the Cosworth was the peak of the Ford badge. So I think the iconic status of the Sierra was its performance, was its looks, because when you think back to the Sierra Cosworth with the big wing on the back, the bonnet vents, the external body kit, we look at it now and it seems the norm, but again, when you look back 37 years ago, it was a very, very radical car to have all these features, and everybody followed. What people don't realise is all the other manufacturers followed Ford. The big wing on the back. Subaru then started producing big wings on the back. Bonnet vents became a norm for everybody. But Ford were always the first to ever do it. And I think the main thing with the Cosworth and the RS500 was its success as a touring car. Everybody watched it. Wherever you watched, in Japan, Australia, India, it won everything. Nothing could beat the RS500. So I think everybody now at my sort of age, you know, 40s to 50s, look back at what they wanted when they were young, or what they had when they were young and stupidly sold it for peanuts. They now want them back, and the RS500 has got to be the top of the tree, hasn't it? I think a lot of people as well didn't really understand the 500 up until recently. You'd be surprised how many people have actually got a standard Sierra Cosworth and think they own an RS500. They do not really understand there is a difference. So I think, and like yourself, you look at them now and you realise what they actually were and how special they were at the time. And it's amazing how many have survived. I mean, I have a record of as many RS500s as we know exist, and we know 100% there's over 400 still around. That's a big number of the initial 500 still left, because I think even when they were new, they were recognised as something quite special. So people tended to put them away, and as you probably know better than anybody now, the amount of low mileage, low owner cars that have come out of the woodwork, where have these cars where have they been? But I think what we fail to remember as well is these cars went through a stage where you couldn't sell them. They were worth nothing because they were stolen so regularly. The insurance companies just would not insure them at any price. You know, so you could buy a Sierra Cosworth for 2,000 or 3,000 quid. You could buy an RS500 for 5,000 quid. You know, nobody wanted them because it was £6,000 to insure it. So they got put away. They got locked away for years and years. And I sort of realised it, I would say as much as 10 years ago now. Then people started to remember them. Our age group wanted to buy them, so we started looking for them, and the value started to climb. And then all of a sudden, all these ones that had been locked away in garages for 20 years, people didn't worry about them when they were worth 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 quid. They just left it sat there. All of a sudden people are seeing on the internet now an RS500 sold for 10 grand. So one would get pulled out of a garage and then one fetched 20 grand, and more would get pulled out of a garage and then 50 grand. And we saw this continuous roll of values just going up and up and up every year. And I remember I said to somebody once that, you know, an RS500 will sell for 100,000. And people thought I'd lost the plot. They did, yeah, 100,000 for a Ford Sierra. When they started regularly reaching 100,000, I said one would sell for $250,000. People thought I'd lost the plot then. And we've seen one, as you will know, now we sell for 560,000 quid.
The 87 Ford Sierra Cosworth RS500, here, Race Retro 2023, here at Silverstone Auctions, here and now at lot 508. It's 530,000 once, 530,000 twice. Third and final, hammers up then here, selling, all done, sold in £530,000.
And I will still put my reputation on the line, and I do know at some point the right car, I think I'll sell for £1 million. I think if you can get the right car, the right miles, the right owners and the right owner, somebody will pay £1 million for an RS500. That might take a few more years yet, but with the low mileage examples, the special cars, the collectors will always pay a premium, you know. And if a car's the right colour, the right owners, and as with one of your cars behind us now has had a very famous owner, that helps. You know, people like to own a car that they can say so-and-so's on this car, and you have a perfect example of that behind us. There was only the three colours, so there was Moonstone Blue, there was white and there was black. You couldn't get an RS500 any other colour. And the numbers of the colours was, the rarest is the Moonstone Blue, they only did 52. Then there was 52 white, but there was also the initial 4 prototypes were all white. So they were added to the build list, so that makes 56 in white and the 392 in black remaining. And the reason there's odd numbers like that is Ford initially wanted them to be all the same colour, but the RS500 was quite a late sort of thing to develop from Ford. They realised they had to homologate 500 cars. They didn't have 500 cars left. All the shells were already in the factory being produced to be Cosworths, and they had to put, I think it was about another 80 in as a late programme. So they just went down the line and went, well, what have we got? What's actually in the factory? And they were all painted. So that's why there's such a varying number of the colours. If you're looking at buying one and you want to make sure, the only way is to check it with a specialist like myself. There's a few people out there. The only way is the chassis number. The RS500 does have a unique chassis number at the end of the chassis number, and we have the original Ford build list from Tickford. That tells us exactly what chassis number a 500 is. It tells us what colour it should be, and it also tells us what the engine number is, because this is an issue with the 500. And not a lot of people realise that the RS500s all started life as a totally standard 3-door Cosworth. So they left the production line as a 3-door Cosworth, were then taken to Tickford, and Tickford converted it into an RS500. So they took all the spoilers and the bumpers off, they put the other ones on. They also switched the engine. So if you actually look at the logbook on an RS500, the engine number that is on the logbook isn't actually the correct number. Now, in today's society, you wouldn't be able to get away with that. You know, this BS rule and this rule that says you couldn't do that. But back then, things were a little bit tamer. So we have the original engine numbers that correspond with the chassis number. So we can tell you what the engine number should be. So you can tell if it's a genuine 500, and you can tell if it's got its original engine in it. Hello, my name's Paul Linfoot. I'm here today down at Nitrous Competitions, where I've come to see the Cosworth King collection that is currently on an instant win system. And not only can you win one of 5 Sierra Cosworths, we have the Sierra 3-door Cosworth to my left, a Sapphire Cosworth to my right, and believe it or not, we have 3 genuine RS500s that you can win. I think you're absolutely bonkers, but I think there's one thing I do here all the time, which I think what you do is fantastic. you hear people say that these cars are now out of reach of your average working man. He can't afford to buy these cars anymore. So this has just got to be a fantastic opportunity for somebody who's always wanted one, who thinks he can never afford one, and he can win one for buttons, can't he? So I think it's very brave of you to do it, but I think it's great at the same time. What an opportunity to win one of these cars. Do you know what? I was only talking to somebody last night, yesterday, sorry, about the cash alternative. I don't really get that, because to me, the buzz of what you do is to win that dream car that you can't afford, or you've always wanted. So to me, to take a cash alternative seems a little bit, you want that car, you want to win it, and I almost think there's an element of disappointment if you took the cash alternative, because like we said, these cars are so expensive now. I mean, RS500s, as we said, up to £500,000 for the right car. Even your run-of-the-mill cars are 150, 160,000. You take the cash, you spend it, you blow it, don't you? You get something like one of these cars, you can use it, you can put it away, you won't get a better pension fund than one of these. But you must remember, you've got to be in it to win it.